Hi everybody and welcome to another gear review. Today we're going to be looking at the Nanlite Forza 60B. Now the B stands for bicolor, so this unit is a hard light, very compact. It's got a Kelvin range from 2700 Kelvin all the way up to 6500 Kelvin. Now also today we're going to be looking at the optional Fresnel mount for it. So the Fresnel mount gives you all of the barn door control and flood spot control that you would expect from a typical small Fresnel like a 300 or a 650. So you can do things like barn door cuts, but of course not only that, you can do barn door cuts and have bicolor control, and you've got a light that is fully dimmable. Alright, so a good place to start off any review is how much does it cost and what do you get for your money? Okay, so this thing's going to sell for, it looks like about 320 US dollars to about the 500 Australian dollar mark. Now the distributor in Australia, which is Protog, so a big thank you to them for getting me a pre-release version for the review. The distributor in Australia, Protog, reckons they'll be selling this for around the $500 mark, including tax, so that's pretty cheap. Now for that $500, you of course get the light, which is very strongly built. You get a carry case, which is, again, a quality built carry case. Now, back when I was starting out, you didn't get cases with any of your lights. You just basically got the lights in a cardboard box and that was it. So I'm amazed at getting this sort of quality bag included in that price. You get the transformer, the mains power transformer to run it, and you get this reflector. Now, the reflector is one of the most highly calibrated reflectors I've ever come across. So I think I said that in the review of the monocolor light last year, but this thing really does concentrate the light down well. Now in terms of other modifiers for it, you can get this dome, you can also get a Fresnel mount, which we'll talk about in a sec, but you can also buy a Bowens Mount adapter so you can use all of your other Bowens Mount modifiers. Now in case you're wondering why this light doesn't just have a Bowens mount, the light is actually physically smaller than a Bowens mount. Now in terms of powering this from batteries, you can use this little handheld mount to power it off NPF batteries, or you can run it off a V-Lock via a D-tap adapter. Now what a lot of you just want to know is how bright is the unit? So I've got technical numbers which we'll go over later in the video, but for the moment I'll give you some real world comparisons because I did a few shootouts. Now I couldn't find anything to compare it to as a bare light with no modifiers on it. But with the Fresnel lens, it comes in at brighter than a 300 watt tungsten Fresnel, but not as bright as a 500. So that gives you an idea of the range. Now with the Fresnel mount on, comparing a bicolor light with another bicolor light of a similar size that has hard controllable optics, I compared it to the Dido Light D-LED Turbo 7. And this unit comes in at about twice the brightness of that. Now here's where things are staggering. This reflector is really well refined. So when I tested the unit with the reflector on, I found it was brighter than a 650 watt tungsten, but nowhere near as bright as a 1K, so that gives you some idea. And comparing it with a bicolor LED of a similar design, I decided to compare it to the 300X from Aperture, because that's the only other light I've got that's bicolor and uses a similar sort of dish. Now, it was quite surprising the result. The Forza 60B came in at 52% the brightness of the Aperture 300X. Now, I've really got to point something out here. That is with both lights with the reflector dishes on. Now, if you do a comparison of both lights with any other modifiers, the Aperture comes in at 4 to 5 times brighter. Alright, so let's have a quick run through of the unit. So on the top, you've got a release button for your mounts, for your modifiers. On the back, you've got down the bottom your power switch. And you've also got an LED display there. Now with the LED display, if you take a look, there's a line running through the display. Now above the line is controlled by the blue button, and below the line is controlled by the black button. So once you figure that out, it's quite easy to drive. So I'm going to do changes above the line. So to toggle what I'm changing, you just press the blue button. Okay, then I twist the knob to do my changes. So I've got my brightness selected there. Okay, if I press my knob again, I can select the CCT. Okay, so pretty straightforward. Now let's get into below the line. So if you want to operate anything below the line, that's the black button does that. So you can press to toggle through your options. Okay, so at the moment I've got effects on or off. What's that? Fan on and off. So when you turn the fan off, it drops to 30% intensity. Channel, so I can select my channel number. Now that's for remote control use, so there's a little clicker remote control you can get. We'll go through that in a sec. Or mobile phone app operation. Press it again and we can select our language. You don't want to mess with that, I'll give you the tip. And you can press it again and you get your version number come up, so you can check your firmware version. Now this unit is firmware updatable. There is a USB port in the bottom, so that's pretty good. All right, so let's go back to effects, and now let's scroll through and have a look at things. So the effects have improved dramatically since the monocolor version. I think in the monocolor version I was a bit harsh. I think I said that the best effect was off, so I wasn't that impressed, but I've got to say I'm a little bit more impressed. So the first effect we've got is CCT loop, where it basically goes through the Kelvin point. That's looking like it's set really slow. I'll just keep skipping through these. Intensity loop. We've got camera flash, or flash, I'm not going to bother with that. Pulsing. Now with all these you can do things like you can change your color temperature. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. Let's keep scrolling through. Pulse, storm. Okay, storm would look better in daylight, but I can't be bothered showing you that. TV effect, paparazzi, which is camera flash, and candle fire. Now candle fire is pretty cool. I was really surprised by this. Have a look. That's, I'll just turn the other lights off. That's a pretty good candle or fire effect. I'm really surprised at that. A lot of lights can't do a good camera or, a good fire or candle effect. So they can't get the roll off on the LED engine. So this really has a good controller on it. And let's keep going through the effects. We've got bad bulb. I'll skip that because I hate that. Fireworks. Yeah, well, you know, if your fireworks are a daylight or tungsten, I suppose that could be could look like fireworks. Explosion. Come on, there we go. You can, of course, adjust the timings. I can't be bothered going through all that. Welding. Now, welding's an interesting one. So I'll change the Kelvin on that, because this unit actually is small enough that you could possibly hide it in front of the person that you're having the welding effect on. Okay, so yeah, not too bad. So look, the effects have improved immensely. One thing I do like with the effects is, let's turn the effects to off. Where's that? That's this knob. One thing I do like with the effects is they seem to have slowed them down. So, for example, the storm effect, you're less likely to get caught halfway through a rolling shutter. So that's a huge improvement. All right, so let's talk about running this unit off mobile phone or a remote control. Now, if you want to run it off a mobile phone app, the phone app is free, but you need one of these bridging stations to go in between. And this Wi-Fi bridge costs about $300 US. Now, I've got to say, in all honesty, I couldn't look anybody in the face and say that this $300 box is worth the phone app. The phone app's a little bit buggy and needs some work on it. I would download the app for free, which it is, and see if it's buggy before buying this. So if you've got the Android version, just try and save it a few times. If it crashes, they haven't fixed the software. If it doesn't crash, they've fixed it, and it might be worth buying the box. Now, the other way to control it is via one of these remote controls, and these are definitely worth the money. These don't cost that much. Now, the remote control can control up to 512 fixtures. Now, the remote control controls your CCT and your brightness. Now, that's worth pointing out because Nanlite also make other products that can run off the remote control that are RGB, but you can't control the RGB side of things. Now, the remote control is pretty cool, so you can operate your dimmer in 1% increments. So it's pretty straightforward. And you can also operate your CCT. Okay, so I'll start playing with my CCT. Now there is one thing I don't like with the remote control. You can adjust your levels, you can adjust your color temperature, but you can't turn the light off. So that's one little limitation with the remote. Now, in case you want to use this as a very small pinpoint hard light source or use it as a floodlight, let's talk about the LED array. Now, the LED array is a very tightly packed checkerboard formation. So you don't get any definite daylight or tungsten shadows off it. It all merges together to make one nice pinpoint source. Now you do get a little bit of shadowing, of multiple shadowing off the LED array, but that's only if you've got something casting a shadow that's within the first 3 inches of the unit. The rest of the time it is a very hard singular shadow point. Now I just want to show you here, I have the unit set to 4,400 Kelvin, so it's using a mixture of its daylight and tungsten emitters, and you can see there it is definitely one shadow source. Okay, now let's talk about the Fresnel mount, and this is the only reason I'm actually interested in these lights, is the Fresnel. So it's about 175 Australian dollars, so that sounds like a lot for a mountable Fresnel, but the difference between this and other mountable Fresnels that are around the same price or cheaper, this isn't crap. So that's a huge point of difference I've got to point out. So it has decent length barn doors. So if you're an old school gaffer, you're already sort of getting a little bit excited. So you've got some decent length barn doors on it. It's got a glass Fresnel, and it won't telescope out or trombone out under its own weight. So I'll just get it onto the light. Now it is a little bit hard to mount because the unit does trombone or collapse back in over the mount system. Okay, so it does get a nice spread on it. So it gets a 45-degree spread, which is unusual. Most mountable Fresnels only go to 40. So I just want to show this here. It won't telescope out under its own weight until you literally turn it. Okay, that's the only way it's going to telescope in or out. Okay, it won't do it under its own weight. So if you've got it tilted down in a studio environment, you don't have to worry that 4 days later it's going to be spotted up and your continuity's all wrecked. All right, so let's fire it up and have a look. Now, there's no spill light out of the back of the unit. So that's something that's worth pointing out. No spill light out the back, even when you telescope into your zoom. Now it spots into 10 degrees. There's no spill light coming out of the barrel. So I'll just turn off. So that's worth pointing out. No spill light coming out of the barrel. However, there is spill light coming out at 90 degrees to the barn doors. Okay, so that is something to note. So you might need to invest in some cinefoil. Now, in terms of the quality of the Fresnel optics, I would say it's a little bit better than, say, an RE300 Plus unit was. So you can do, proper barn door slashes, things like that. But I wouldn't say it's the best Fresnel I've come across, but I wouldn't say it's as good as a DeSisti Magis, for example. But it's definitely better than an RE300 Plus Fresnel, and the spot is quite impressive. All right, let's go through the pros and cons, starting with the pros. And the first one's pretty obvious. It's very compact. So that's a Dado Light D-LED Turbo 7, and this unit's not that much bigger, and that's with the dish on. So, it's very small. So that really lends itself to rigging it in small places on locations. It's extremely lightweight. I mean, the thing, I can lift it up and down with my small finger. So, no problem at all there. Very, very lightweight. So that really lends it to rigging, from a gaffer's perspective. The next advantage to it, the next pro to it, is it actually has really good color render. So we'll talk about that in a sec when we go through all the technical data. The color render scores are pretty good on it. And you can operate it off a remote control. So they're the pros. Now let's get into the negatives. So there is one thing that I don't regard as a negative, but depending on the type of work you do, you might regard this as a negative. And that is any light that's this small and this compact and this bright needs a cooling fan. Okay, so the cooling fan could be a problem for some people. Now I've been running this in the video with the cooling fan on. So I'm wearing a microphone right next to the thing throughout the video, so some of you might have heard it, but just in case you haven't been listening to it, I'll shut up now and you can have a listen. All right, so to give you some idea of how loud it is, this is probably going to help gaffers more than anybody else, but I reckon it's about as loud as the cooling fans on a RE Sky Panel S60, but that's with the cooling fans facing towards you. Okay, so that's about the same level of volume, so that pretty much doesn't help anyone else, unless you're a gaffer to understand that. But I've had a chat to a few of my clients who bought the Nanlite Forza 60 daylight only versions, which have the same cooling fan. And a lot of them are saying that it's not a problem for interview situations if you don't have them too close to the talent. Now, from my point of view, listening to it, if I was doing an interview and we're in a very echoey room, like a kitchen or something like that, and I had 3 of these within, say, 1.5 meters of a boom mic, I would be keeping a very nervous eye on a sound recordist. But I've got to say, for what I'm going to be using it for as a hard light, I'm not going to have it within 1.5 meters of a microphone, so I don't think that's going to be a problem. Now, the next negative on it is you can turn the fan off. That sounds like a positive, but the light reduces in intensity. So I'll just do that now. So we're running at 100% brightness, and I'll just select fan off, and the unit drops to 30% brightness. So that's quite a substantial drop in brightness. So my concern is there that if you are looking to run this through a modifier like a softbox, and you're going to use it in close, by the time you drop it to 30% intensity to get rid of the fan noise, I don't think you'd have enough light level. Now, the next issue for me, or negative for me, is more of an oversight than a negative for Nanlite, and that is all of the power options. So whether it's running off the AC here or running off batteries, all of the power options sort of run on the assumption that you're either using the thing handheld or it's going to be mounted onto a light stand. So for example, if you wanted to rig this on a boom arm, look at the length of cable you've got between the transformer and the head. There's pretty much nothing there. So one of the things I'll be doing when I get my kit of these is I'll be making an adapter cable here to go to 4-pin, so I can use my 4-pin XLR cables and then go into batteries using DTAP adapters. Because this thing is so lightweight, you could mount this onto a side of a building in a laneway quite easily, but then what do you do with the battery and the transformer? So I think that's about the only limitation I can see to it, is they just really haven't thought about any head leads. I don't really have any other negatives with it, apart from, I think, not being able to operate it off a phone app without the box in between. I think that's a bit of a negative, but I don't really see anything else to criticise with it. So look, let's get into the technical data. All right, let's start off the technical review by having a look at the brightness. So I took these measurements at 3 meters. I took 2 sets of measurements, one at 3,200 Kelvin and one at 5,600 Kelvin. I took a reading with no modifier, with the Fresnel and with the dish. And I also took note of the kelvins so you could see how much the Kelvin shifts from modifier to modifier. At 3,200 Kelvin with no modifier, the unit was spitting out 207 lux. With the Fresnel added, it was spitting out 522 lux with a Kelvin increase of 61. And with the dish added, it was spitting out 748 lux with a Kelvin increase of 108. Now at 5,600 Kelvin with no modifier, the unit was spitting out 256 lux. That increased to 698 lux with the Fresnel attachment, with an increase of Kelvin of 186. Now with the dish on, it jumps to a staggering 986 lux with a Kelvin increase of plus 377. Next, let's have a look at AC power draw, which is how much power the unit uses when it's running through its mains power adapter. All right, so the most power usage I detected was 80 watts, and that was at either end of the Kelvin scale. Now at 3,200 Kelvin, the unit pulls 73 watts, and at 5,600 Kelvin, it was pulling 75 watt. Next, let's take a look at the average CCT accuracies. So in our warm whites, that's anything below 4,000 Kelvin, it dials in a CCT with an accuracy of plus or minus 91 Kelvin. In the mid whites, that's 4,000 to 5,000 Kelvin, its average accuracy was plus 241 Kelvin. And in the cool whites, that's 5,000 to 6,000 degrees Kelvin, it was dialing in a Kelvin with an average accuracy of plus 345 Kelvin. Now let's have a look at TLCI, Television Lighting Consistency Index scores. The warm whites, the unit was scoring on average 97.8. In the mid whites, the unit was scoring a consistent 99, and in the cool whites, the unit was scoring 98.4. Now let's have a look at TM30 color vector testing results, and these are the RF scores. In the warm whites, it was scoring 93.5. In the mid whites, it was scoring 94, and in the cool whites, it was scoring 93. Let's take a closer look at our more commonly used kelvins, starting with 3200 Kelvin. When I dialed in 3200 Kelvin, I got 3196 Kelvin with a TLCI score of 98. The CRI average was 96, and only R12 was below 90. TM30 color vector testing reveals a more accurate score would be 94% color render with 101% saturation. Measured against the tungsten standard, the SSI was 83. Here is the wavelength analysis, and the delta UV score is minus 0.0027, which means that the light is ever so slightly pink by about a 1/8 correction gel. When I dialed in 4400 Kelvin, I got 4640 Kelvin with a TLCI score of 99. The average CRI score was 97.5, and only R12 was below 90. TM30 color vector analysis suggests a more accurate score would be 94% color render with 101% saturation. Here is the wavelength analysis, and the delta UV score came in at minus 0.0018, which means that the light is slightly pink by less than a 1/8 correction gel. When I dialed in 5600 Kelvin, I got 5968 Kelvin with a TLCI score of 98. The average CRI score was 96.6, R9 and R12 were below 90. TM30 color vector testing reveals a more accurate color score would be 93% color render with 99% color saturation. The SSI score against a daylight standard was 72%. Here is the wavelength analysis, and the delta UV score was plus 0.0030, which means that the light is slightly green by a bit more than a 1/8 correction gel. Okay, that's the Nanlite Forza 60 bicolor done. I'll catch you on the next episode of Gaffer and Gear. Don't forget to click like and subscribe.